Usually when we talk about the foundation of human civilization, we tend to think of things that gleam, like bronze or iron or steel.
Right, the alpha materials.
Exactly. We picture the smelting of ore, the forging of weapons, building these massive metal bridges. We just associate human progress with materials that feel, invincible.
Yeah, there's a reason we name our historical eras the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. It
Right.
creates this narrative that human history is just this steady march toward harder, sharper, more aggressive materials. We tend to focus entirely on the things it can conquer.
We really do. But today, we are completely flipping that narrative. We are looking at something you walk on, wash off your shoes, and probably ignore every single day. We are taking mud plain, ordinary, ubiquitous Earth and reframing it as the ultimate collaborator in human history.
It's quite a pivot.
It is. Welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to explore a fascinating source document we have, simply titled clay.pdf. It's a comprehensive look at the geology, history, and chemistry of clay. We are going to see exactly how microscopic mineral sheets birthed agriculture, bureaucracy, empires, and even the stealth technology you're likely using right at this very moment.
And it really requires a profound shift in perspective to grasp what this material actually is.
Yeah.
Because when you get into the geological reality, clay isn't just dirt. Think of it more as a biography of place.
A biography of place, I like that.
Yeah, it is patient water, compressed time, and weathered rock. Every single clay deposit on this planet is a literal record of a landscape's history. It's mountain erosion, river transport, ancient volcanic ash settling over millions of years. It sets this incredibly philosophical tone right from the start because you realize you aren't just looking at soil, you are looking at deep time.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can talk about cities and empires, we have to understand what this stuff is doing on a microscopic level. And I'll be honest, that was my first major misconception. I always thought clay was just, dirt that happened to be wet.
Most people do.
But it's not. It is a very specific family of fine-grained minerals.
Precisely. Scientifically, clay is composed of hydrous aluminum silicate minerals. And the defining feature, the thing that separates it from just being mud, is the size. These particles are incredibly tiny.
Like how tiny are we talking?
We are talking typically less than 0.02 millimeters in diameter.
Wait, really? 0.002?
Yeah. To put that in perspective, they are completely invisible to the naked eye. If you rub silk between your fingers, it feels gritty. But if you rub clay between your fingers, it feels perfectly smooth, almost like a lubricant. And because these particles are so small, and because they carry a very specific electrical charge, they behave entirely differently from sand or silt or gravel.
It's fascinating because we throw the word clay around as this catch-all term, but the source text explains there are actually distinct families within this group.
Oh, absolutely.
There's kaolinite, which is incredibly stable, pure white, and forms the basis for fine porcelain.
Right.
Then you have the smectite, or bentonite group, which behaves almost like a living sponge. It swells dramatically when it encounters water. There's elite, which is super common in the soils beneath our feet, and chlorite, which has this faint greenish tint and comes from intense metamorphic environments deep underground.
What connects all of them is the sheer patience required for their creation. This is not a fast process. The geological formation of clay takes thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of years.
Millions. That's just wild.
It really is. Let's walk through how it actually happens. It almost always starts with exposed igneous rocks, particularly feldspar-rich rocks like granite. Picture a massive granite mountain range. Rainwater falls from the sky, and as it drops through the atmosphere, it absorbs carbon dioxide.
So the rain is already slightly acidic before it even hits the ground.
Exactly. It becomes a weak carbonic acid. Then it hits the topsoil, where decaying leaves and biological activity add even more carbon dioxide to the water, making it slightly more acidic. Over immense stretches of time, that mild acid seeps into the microscopic fissures of the granite. The acid attacks the feldspar specifically.
It's literally dissolving the mountain.
Slowly, yes. It leaches away the soluble elements, the potassium, the sodium, the calcium. And what gets left behind, completely reconfigured at a molecular level, are these microscopic sheet-like minerals. The hard stone has been dismantled and reconstructed into clay.
It's basically rock that has been chewed up by time and rain. But you mentioned sheets, and this is the core structural magic of clay that we need to talk about, because this explains why clay can be shaped by a human hand, but also turned to stone in a fire. Can you explain the actual architecture of these minerals?
Of course. So clay minerals are crystalline, But they aren't chunky crystals, like a diamond or a piece of quartz. They're built from microscopic sheets. Specifically, they're composed of layers of silica tetrahedra, which look like tiny microscopic pyramids, and aluma octahedra, which are 8-sided molecular structures.
Okay.
These structures bond together to form incredibly thin plates, and here's where the physics become magical. The surfaces of these plates carry a slight negative electrical charge.
And water molecules are polar, right? They have
No.
a positive end and a negative end.
Exactly. So the positive end of the water molecules is drawn to the negative charge of the clay sheets. The water literally slips right between the molecular layers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that thin film of water acts as a perfect microscopic lubricant. It allows these crystalline sheets to slide past one another without losing their cohesive bond. That sliding mechanism is what gives wet clay its famous plasticity. It's why you can take a lump of it, throw it on a potter's wheel, and pull it up into the shape of a vase. The sheets are just gliding over one another.
You know, think of clay like a microscopic deck of cards.
That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, when the cards are totally dry, they just sit there. If you try to bend a thick deck of dry cards, it resists. But if you get that deck slightly wet, the water gets between every single card. Now, the cards slide past each other incredibly smoothly. You can bend the deck, twist it, shape it into a curve, and it holds together because of the surface tension of the water.
Right, the cohesion is still there.
Exactly. But here's the critical transformation. Put that wet deck of cards into a kiln. Heat it up to a couple of thousand degrees. You drive every single molecule of water out from between the cards. They don't just dry out, they chemically fuse together into a solid, irreversible block of concrete. You can't unfuse them. The sliding stops forever. It's a permanent chemical lock.
That is a perfect visualization. The intense heat causes a process called sintering and eventually vitrification, where the edges of those microscopic sheets literally melt and glassify together. It highlights the great physical paradox of this material.
The paradox being its state changes.
Exactly. Most materials in nature are binary in their state under normal conditions. Wood is hard until it rots. Stone is hard until it breaks. Sand is loose and crumbly. But clay uniquely transitions across boundaries. It is soft enough to receive the delicate swirl of a human fingerprint, yet once it goes through that trial by fire, it is hard enough to outlast kingdoms.
Which raises an incredible point about what we are actually touching when we handle ceramics. If it takes millions of years of acid rain and mountain erosion to form this stuff, we are basically mining ancient landscapes.
You are. When you walk across a clay riverbank, or when you hold a piece of unglazed pottery, you might literally be holding the remnants of a prehistoric floodplain, or the dust of a weathered mountain system that existed before the dinosaurs. It is recycled earth in its most profound form.
And for anyone listening to this, you might be wondering, okay, microscopic silica sheets are neat, but why should I care?
Right, what's the practical application?
Exactly, because this exact microscopic structure, these negatively charged water-lubricated plates, is the hidden architecture of our global food system. Clay's charged surfaces don't just hold water, they retain exchangeable ions. They hold on to calcium, magnesium, and potassium. They participate actively in nutrient cycling.
It's vital for agriculture.
If we didn't have clay in our soil, if our topsoil was just sand and silt, the earth would be hungry, porous, and dry. Rain would wash all the nutrients straight down into the bedrock. Clay is the battery that holds the charge of the soil. It keeps the whole garden alive.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture of human history, that exact life-sustaining property and its ability to transition from soft mud to hard stone is what paved the way for human beings to completely change how we exist on this planet.
It birthed civilization.
It really did. Because clay perfectly matched the physical and psychological needs of early humans who were making the terrifying transition from a nomadic lifestyle to a settled agricultural life.
Let's explore that transition, because we often take staying in one place for granted. When you're a hunter-gatherer, a nomad, you are constantly on the move. Your entire life is dictated by the seasons and the migration of animals. So the things you carry have to be light. You carry water in animal skins, or hollowed-out gourds, or tightly woven baskets sealed with pitch.
Lighter.
But organic materials have a fatal flaw. Baskets rot in the damp, gourds crack in the sun, animal skins eventually tear or degrade.
They are temporary containers for a temporary lifestyle.
Yeah.
But when human beings discovered agriculture, everything changed. You plant a field of grain, and now you are geographically tethered to that field. You have to wait for the harvest. You have to build a permanent dwelling.
You can't just pack up and leave.
Exactly. And more importantly, when the harvest comes in, you suddenly have a massive surplus of calories that needs to be protected from moisture, insects, and rodents for an entire year until the next harvest. A rotting gourd is no longer going to cut it. A rat can chew through an animal's skin in 5 minutes.
So clay changed human time. You take this mud, you shape it into a massive amphora or a storage jar, you fire it, and suddenly you have a rat-proof, rot-proof, waterproof vault. A fired pot doesn't just survive the winter, it survives for millennia.
It was an absolute revolution in survival technology. And what's incredible is that clay didn't just solve one isolated problem, it solved almost all of civilization's baseline infrastructural problems simultaneously.
It's like the ultimate multi-tool.
It really is.
Yeah.
We needed deep storage for grain, olive oil, and wine so we could survive famine and drought. Clay provided the vessels. We needed to cook with sustained indirect heat to boil water, render fats, and expand the nutritional value of tough roots and grains. Clay gave us heat-tolerant cooking pots that wouldn't catch fire over a hearth.
And it goes way beyond just pots, right? We needed shelter. Wood is scarce in many parts of the world, especially in the cradle of civilization in the Middle East. Stone is incredibly labor-intensive to quarry and shape, but clay, you just mix it with water and some straw, press it into a wooden mold, leave it in the sun, and you have a brick. Clay gave us the mud bricks for our first houses, and eventually the massive, imposing city walls of places like Jericho or Uruk.
It even scaled up to complex municipal engineering. Think of the Roman hypocaust heating systems.
Oh, the underfloor heating.
Yes. They build raised floors, supported by stacks of fired clay tiles, allowing hot air from a furnace to circulate underneath the floorboards of their villas and bathhouses. It was ancient radiant heating, only possible because fired clay can withstand and conduct intense heat without burning or melting.
That's brilliant.
And crucially, as cities grew denser, we needed sanitation. Without a way to move fresh water in and human waste out, dense settlements immediately fall victim to cholera and dysentery. Clay gave us the first standardized pipes and drains. It quite literally made living in close proximity survivable.
It's the Swiss Army knife of the ancient world. But here's where the deep dive takes a pivot that completely shifted my understanding of history. We always associate bureaucracy, taxes, laws, receipts, written history with paper. We think of scrolls and quills.
Sure.
But the origins of writing didn't happen on paper. It happened in mud. There was this massive administrative revolution in Mesopotamia, and the first scribes were basically working with that microscopic deck of cards mud we talked about.
It fundamentally altered how humans govern each other. Think about how a city functions. Storage allowed for an agricultural surplus. That surplus meant not everyone had to farm. You could have specialized bakers, soldiers, priests, and kings. That specialization allowed populations to concentrate into early cities.
Right. The whole structure changes.
Exactly. But a city of tens of thousands of people requires complex administration. You can no longer rely on memory to track who owns which plot of land, who owes what percentage of their grain yield to the temple, or what the specific trade tariffs are. You need a permanent ledger.
And clay was the perfect ledger because it was infinitely available and cheap. You didn't have to hunt down an animal and scrape its hide for parchment or harvest and process specialized reeds for papyrus. You just walked down to the riverbank, grabbed a handful of fine clay, patted it into a smooth, wet cushion in the palm of your hand, and took a sharpened reed stylus.
Exactly. The scribes pressed the wedge-shaped tip of the reed into the wet clay. That's what cuneiform means, wedge-shaped. They didn't draw lines. They press impressions into the molecular sheets of the clay.
And if you made a mistake, you just smoothed it over with your thumb and started again.
Yes, it was entirely forgiving. Once the record was correct, you simply laid the tablet out in the hot Mesopotamian sun to dry. It became a hard, durable document.
But unlike papyrus or parchment, which, decay over time, get eaten by insects, or tragically burn up in library fires, the Library of Alexandria clay has this entirely unique relationship with disaster.
It does. It's one of the great ironies of archaeology. When an invading army sacks a city, the first thing they usually do after looting is put it to the torch. If a city's records were on paper or papyrus, a fire means total historical amnesia. The records are vaporized.
Right.
But when an ancient Mesopotamian or Assyrian palace was burned to the ground, the intense heat of the blazing wooden roof collapsing onto the archive room didn't destroy the clay tablets. It acted as an accidental kiln.
It baked the records into stone.
Yes. The fire literally locked the molecular structure of the clay permanently.
That is how we have civilization's memory preserved.
Oh.
Because of these accidental firings, archaeologists have dug up vast libraries. We have ancient Assyrian medical records detailing treatments for diseases. We have complex astronomical observations charting the movements of Venus. We have the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest stories ever written.
It's astounding what survived.
And we also have incredibly mundane things like recipes for beer or a disgruntled merchant complaining about the poor quality of copper ingots he was sold. We have the daily life of humanity, frozen in time, purely because a building caught fire and baked the mud.
The destruction of a city is exactly what preserved its memory for us thousands of years later. It's poetic, but it also raises a much more complex historical dynamic. The use of clay to record information stabilized society by creating predictable laws and ledgers, yes, but it also made massive systemic inequality scalable.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the very same material that built the sacred temple and recorded the epic poetry also built the walls of the debtor's prison. The exact same clay tablet that preserved a beautiful myth also recorded a crippling, multi-generational tax debt owed by a peasant to a king. So I have to push back a little on this idea of clay just being a helpful tool for early humans. Did clay actually cause hierarchy, or did it just give early kings the ultimate administrative weapon to control populations?
That is a profound distinction, and one that anthropologists and historians debate fiercely. Clay itself didn't invent human greed, ambition, or the desire for power. Those are human traits.
Yep.
But clay provided the technological capacity for mass control. Think about the logistics of empire. You cannot easily tax 100,000 people if you cannot write down exactly what they owe and when it's due. You cannot build a massive standing army without standardized brick to build the barracks and massive clay grain silos to hoard the food required to feed soldiers who aren't farming.
Right. If you only have spoken agreements, society has to remain small. A spoken promise is flexible. If a drought hits and my farm fails, the village elder might forgive my debt because he can clearly see my crops died. But a clay tablet in a royal archive miles away doesn't care about a drought.
Exactly. Clay made administration rigid and possible across vast distances, and that administration made severe systemic inequality possible. It turned spoken, flexible human relationships into durable, enforceable obligations. The tablet became the absolute truth, backed by the force of the state.
So when you, the listener, sign a mortgage document, an employment contract, or file your taxes today, you are participating in a system of durable obligations that was literally invented in mud thousands of years ago. It's the exact same psychological and administrative mechanism, the binding ledger, just transferred from a baked clay tablet to a secure PDF on a server. We are still living in the bureaucratic architecture built by those ancient scribes.
And that transition to massive, scaled-up civilizations, driven by endless ledgers and permanent infrastructure, brings us to a much darker reality that we must confront. Building these cities, these empires, and these sprawling bureaucracies required millions, sometimes billions, of bricks and vessels.
Yeah.
Moving from the marvel of clay's utility, we have to look at the physical human cost of its extraction. Because mud is heavy, and processing it is brutal.
Yeah, we really have to talk about the hidden hands, because when you look at a beautiful porcelain vase in a museum or the majestic brick ruins of an ancient ziggurat, it's so easy to romanticize it. But digging up and processing millions of tons of clay has traditionally been incredibly low-status, physically punishing work. It's not glamorous.
Not at all.
It's done in open, muddy pits and sweltering brick fields. We are talking about laborers enduring bent backs, chronically cracked and bleeding hands from the constant moisture and mineral exposure, and the severe respiratory toll of silica dust inhalation silicosis from mixing dry clays. And that's before you even get to the extreme dangerous heat of the kilns.
The physical toll is immense, and because clay is so universally available and heavy, you don't transport the raw material very far. You build the kiln where the clay is, and you find the cheapest possible labor to work it. The historical record of this exploitation is extensive and grim.
The source material highlighted some specific examples, right?
It did. Consider the massive pottery industries of the 19th century. There is a deep analysis of the stoneware produced in Edgefield, South Carolina. That entire highly lucrative industry was heavily shaped and driven by enslaved labor.
And within that brutal system, you have stories of incredible, almost defiant artistry. Like David Drake, the renowned enslaved potter, he wasn't just throwing massive, beautiful storage vessels. He was actively inscribing them with original poetry and signing his name at a time and place in the American South where it was often illegal for an enslaved person to read or write.
It's a stark, powerful reminder of the duality of the material. Clay art preserves both profound human beauty and systemic violence simultaneously. You have incredible artistry, defiance, and skill on one side of the vessel, and the reality of forced, uncompensated, brutal labor on the other.
And what's crucial to understand is that this exploitation isn't just ancient history or a relic of the 19th century. It brings it right up to the present day. When we look at global infrastructure today, reports from organizations like the International Labor Organization and the U.S. Department of Labor document widespread, ongoing forced child labor and debt bondage in informal brick kilns, particularly in regions of South Asia.
It's modern tragedy.
We are talking about modern brick fields where workers, sometimes entire multi-generational families, get bound to kiln owners through predatory advance payment systems. They spend their entire lives molding wet clay in the sun to pay off debts that are mathematically impossible to clear.
This is the central moral paradox of clay. Because it is so ubiquitous, so common, and so cheap to acquire, the suffering involved in processing it becomes completely invisible to the end user. If you are mining diamonds or gold, there is an inherent understanding that the material is rare and valuable, and the supply chain is heavily scrutinized. But a brick, a simple terracotta bowl, the resource seems so humble that the immense labor required to produce it at scale is just ignored.
It creates this massive class split throughout human history. Let's look at porcelain for a second. Chinese porcelain became the ultimate global luxury commodity centuries ago. European royals were obsessed with it. It was pure elite status theater.
Oh, absolutely. The courts couldn't get enough of it.
But the extraction of the kaolin clay, the crushing of the rocks, the hauling of the water, and the brutal lung-destroying work inside the massive dragon kilns were almost always done by vulnerable, rural, or bonded laborers who could never afford to eat off the plates they were risking their lives to make.
It completely reframes how you look at a ceramic object. A simple clay bowl can symbolize extreme, grinding poverty, or can symbolize imperial prestige and staggering wealth, entirely depending on who is holding it and who is forced to make it.
It's kind of like the fast fashion of the ancient world. It's everywhere, it's absolutely essential for daily life, but it relies on a supply chain that completely hides intense human suffering. It just doesn't have the cinematic, high-stakes drama of something like deep shaft coal mining or offshore oil drilling, so it's much easier for society to just look past it.
That's a very apt comparison.
Yeah.
The mundane nature of the product masks the intensity of the production. And beyond the human toll, we also have to acknowledge the massive historical and ongoing environmental cost. Firing billions of bricks and ceramics requires unimaginable amounts of fuel. Before natural gas and electricity, traditional kilns burned wood and charcoal. This contributed heavily to massive deforestation around growing urban centers throughout history. Rome, for instance, had to constantly expand its timber supply chains just to feed the kilns making the bricks to build Rome.
And even today, inefficient, traditional updraft kilns in developing nations emit massive amounts of black carbon, sulfur oxides, and greenhouse gases. It's not just digging a hole. Extracting clay carelessly can literally strip the living topsoil, the skin of the earth, causing severe land degradation, destroying agricultural viability, and causing runoff that pollutes local water systems.
It forces a reckoning with our physical environment. The built world requires sacrifice, both human and ecological.
Next time you walk down a city street, look at the ordinary infrastructure around you. Look at the towering brick facades of old factories, the pavement under your feet, the terracotta tiles on roofs. All of it carries a hidden labor memory. It forces you to look at a simple brick wall and ask, whose hands carried the mud that built my world? What lungs breathed in the dust?
It is a deeply sobering thought, and it connects directly to why humanity has such a complex, intimate, almost spiritual relationship with this material. Because despite its dark history of labor and environmental toll, humanity has an emotional connection to clay that we simply do not share with cold, modern materials like stainless steel, glass, or plastic.
Let's dive into the psychology of that connection, because it is everywhere in our deep cultural consciousness. Clay is a nearly universal symbol of human origin. You look at Mesopotamian myths, where the gods mix clay with the blood of a slain deity to mold humanity. You look at the Abrahamic traditions in Genesis. Humans are fashioned from the dust of the ground, from the earth.
Right.
You see it in Greek mythology with Prometheus shaping man out of mud. Over and over across unconnected cultures, the story is the same. We come from the wet earth, and our language is absolutely saturated with it too. We say a powerful leader has feet of clay when they have a hidden structural weakness. We talk about children being molded by their experiences.
What's fascinating is dissecting exactly why we default to that metaphor. There is a specific psychological framework introduced by theorists in our source material to explain this intimacy. They describe clay's biological and environmental role as being Kelly-coded.
Okay, Kelly-coded. I love this concept because it gives mud a distinct personality. But break down what that actually means for us. Who is Kelly, conceptually?
In this psychological framework, the Kelly persona represents the antithesis of the aggressive, conquering alpha materials we talked about at the beginning of the show, like iron or bronze. Iron is forged in roaring flames, beaten with hammers, used to cut and dominate. It is aggressive.
It forces its will on the world.
Exactly. Clay, on the other hand, is Kelly-coded. It is grounded, nurturing, receptive, and easy to overlook. It doesn't conquer. It quietly holds the whole system together. It represents empathy, steady support, and life-sustaining patience.
It's the gardener, not the warrior.
Precisely. It receives form rather than imposing it. It shelters us as brick. It nourishes our growth indirectly by holding the nutrients in the soil. It holds our water. It is collaborative.
And you feel that collaboration in the actual psychology of touch. Think about it. If you hit a piece of steel with a hammer, it rings out, it resists you. It takes immense kinetic energy to force it to change shape. But wet clay gives you immediate soft feedback. You push your thumb into it and it yields perfectly to your pressure. You leave a fingerprint and it stays exactly as you left it. A fingerprint can remain visibly locked in fired clay for thousands of years. It's a material that actually remembers your touch.
And consider the bodily resemblance, which is where the mortality metaphor comes from. Look at the life cycle of clay. When it is wet, it is soft, flexible, deeply responsive, and vulnerable. As it dries, it becomes stiffer. Once it is fired, it achieves permanence, but at a cost, it becomes rigid, brittle, and incapable of changing shape again without breaking. It perfectly mirrors the human lifespan.
That's beautifully put.
We are born soft and impressionable, and as we age and undergo the fires of experience, our identities solidify, but we also become more brittle.
We instinctively see ourselves in clay because it visibly responds to touch the way human identity responds to life experience.
Exactly. And fired ceramics represent our ultimate psychological tension between vulnerability and permanence. A ceramic bowl can last for 10,000 years buried in the ground, completely ignoring the decay of time. But if you drop it on a tile floor, it shatters into 100 pieces in a fraction of a second. It is simultaneously invincible and incredibly fragile.
So what does this all mean when we buy handmade pottery at a farmer's market, or when we enjoy the tactile feel of an unglazed mug? Is our obsession with clay really just an obsession with our own mortality? Are we basically looking into a muddy mirror, seeing our own fragility and our desperate desire to become permanent?
I think the evidence heavily suggests exactly that.
Yeah.
And you could see it play out vividly in consumer psychology today. Think about how different types of clay make us feel. Rough, unglazed earthenware terracotta signals rustic authenticity, warmth, and groundedness. We put our houseplants in it.
Right.
But highly refined, translucent, perfectly fired porcelain signals wealth, cosmopolitanism, and delicate refinement.
In our hyper-digital, mass-produced world where everything is perfectly machined, plastic, or glass screens, things like clay animation, like Wallace and Gromit, or traditional stop-motion or handmade, slightly lopsided pottery, feel incredibly grounding. We gravitate toward them because they retain the visible evidence of human making. We see the thumbprint. We emotionally respond to the imperfection because it proves a human was there. We trust it because it feels real.
It grounds us in our own physical reality. But what makes this story even more complex is that while we are busy seeking out artisanal pottery to feel grounded, the industrial reality of clay has moved far beyond the potter's wheel. You might think we've outgrown clay on a massive scale. We live in the age of silicon microchips, steel skyscrapers, and carbon fiber. We're sending robotic rovers to Mars.
We think we're past the mud phase.
We do, but clay hasn't disappeared at all. It has just gone completely undercover. We have entered the era of invisible clay.
The scale of modern clay use absolutely blew my mind when we were reading the source text. We are not talking about a quaint cottage industry. The U.S. Geological Survey estimates recent U.S. clay production alone at around 26 million tons annually, valued at nearly $1.8 billion. 26 million tons of mud being mined, processed, and utilized every single year.
It's staggering.
We are not transitioning away from clay, we are just transitioning away from using it inefficiently. We've taken the microscopic magic of those sliding sheets and engineered them into the fabric of modern life.
It is the ultimate stealth ingredient. Let's look at kaolin, the pure white clay we mentioned earlier. For centuries, its highest calling was considered to be fine porcelain plates and teacups. Not anymore. Today, vast quantities of kaolin are used in paper manufacturing. It is coated onto the surface of high-quality paper to give it that glossy, smooth finish and to prevent ink from bleeding through the fibers. When you flip through a glossy magazine, you are essentially touching a thin sheet of white clay.
And it gets even more intimate than that. Kaolin and other highly purified clays are used extensively as binders and diluents in the pharmaceutical industry. When you swallow a painkiller, an antibiotic, the active chemical ingredient is often just a tiny grain of powder.
Right, they need a vehicle for it.
Exactly. They need something biologically inert to pack that chemical into a solid, swallowable form that won't dissolve in your throat but will break down in your stomach. They use purified clay.
Then you have the smectite and bentonite groups, the swelling clays. Yes, it is the main ingredient in clumping cat litter, which is a massive industry in itself because of its ability to instantly absorb moisture and lock in odors. But on an industrial scale, bentonite is critical for environmental protection because it swells when wet. Engineers use it to create massive impermeable liners at the bottom of landfills or toxic waste sites. It creates a seal that prevents hazardous chemicals from leaching down into the groundwater.
It's also the secret weapon in the oil and gas industry. When they drill deep into the earth, the drill bit gets incredibly hot and creates tons of rock chips. They pump a specialized fluid called drilling mud down the hole. It's heavily formulated with bentonite. The mud lubricates the bit, cools it down, and because the clay makes the fluid viscous, it carries the rock cuttings all the way back up to the surface. It also coats the walls of the drill hole to prevent blowouts. We literally use mud to drill through rock to get the oil that powers the modern world.
And looking forward, the future innovations rely heavily on the precise manipulation of these microscopic crystalline sheets. Material scientists are developing nanoclay packaging films, infusing microscopic clay particles into bioplastics to make them stronger and more heat-resistant while remaining biodegradable. They are developing advanced drug delivery platforms using clay nanotubes to release medicine slowly inside the body over time.
We are even seeing a return to earth in architecture, but updated for the 21st century. Engineers are using massive 3D printers to extrude specialized clay mixtures to print low-cost, structurally sound, climate-adapted housing on demand. The very properties that made clay useful to a Neolithic potter 10,000 years ago, its plasticity, its mineral stability, its thermal mass, make it an ideal material for cutting-edge engineering today. We are living in houses built on clay foundations, reading off paper coated in clay, taking pills bound with clay, and using cosmetics pigmented by clay.
But there is a modern catch. A profound sustainability challenge that brings us full circle to the chemistry we discussed at the beginning, that permanent chemical lock. Once clay is fired in a kiln, once those microscopic sheets of silica and alumina fuse and glassify, its mineral structure is permanently, irreversibly changed.
Right. You can recycle a glass bottle by melting it down into another glass bottle. You can melt an aluminum can and make a new airplane wing. But you cannot melt a fired brick down and turn it back into wet, moldable clay. True closed-loop recycling for ceramics is basically impossible.
It is a one-way street from soft earth to permanent ceramic. Fired clay can be downcycled. We can crush up old bricks and toilets to use as aggregate for road base or drainage layers, but it will never be a plastic living mud again. Which means every time we fire a piece of ceramic, we are permanently locking away a tiny piece of the Earth's geological flexibility.
But it proves that humanity hasn't abandoned its oldest collaborator. We've just found ways to integrate it into the microscopic foundations of modern technology. It's still doing what it has always done. It's still holding the garden together, just in a much more complex, industrialized garden.
It is the material of first permanence, the medium of our earliest memories, and it remains the invisible infrastructure of our modern world.
So, to recap this incredible journey we've been on today, we started by looking at microscopic geological sheets of weathered rock time and water compressed into mud over millions of years. We saw how that mud allowed early humans to stop wandering and settle down. We saw how it became the first cuneiform tablets, birthing administration, complex laws, and civilization's memory. We confronted the brutal physical reality of the brick kilns and the hidden, often exploited hands that physically built our world. We looked into the psychological mirror of our own fragility, seeing our mortality reflected in a fired pot. And finally, we uncovered the invisible clay coating our modern pharmaceutical binders, glossy paper, and stealth tech.
It is a profound reminder that human civilization isn't just made of lofty ideas and abstract philosophies. It is made of physical materials, touched by physical workers, fired by immense fuel, and embedded in every single part of our daily lives.
Think about the timeline of the Earth. When human civilization is long gone, millions of years from now, almost everything we have built will be erased. All our steel skyscrapers will have rusted into dust. Our wooden structures will have rotted away. Our incredibly advanced digital servers and the data they hold will have decayed into absolutely nothing. But because an ancient potter decided to put a wet lump of clay into a roaring kiln, our porcelain teacups, our ceramic spark plugs, our plumbing pipes, and our humble fired bricks will remain. They will form a permanent, distinct geological layer in the Earth's crust, marking the exact era when humans were here. We took the soft, forgetful mud and we forced the planet to remember us forever. The next time you hold a simple ceramic mug of coffee, ask yourself, what story is your touch leaving behind?